Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. We have some Bazaar updates and I do want to talk through them because the Bazaar is down right now because they have to update, so I figured why not go through the actual patch notes. So should be a pretty quick one. It is the first patch since closed beta, so hopefully they have some addressing some of the egregious builds. There are a lot of them, honestly, but it looks like they're going to be going one at a time, trying to get through stuff until it's pretty fixed. So, I do think the game's pretty new. I would prefer to be able to kind of like have a image of Skyscraper and all the items, but right now, there isn't like a wiki or anything where you can grab the images or something and showcase that. So I'm just going to talk about the items themselves, what they do, if you're not super familiar with what each item does, and hopefully that can alleviate the problem. Hopefully in the future we'll have wikis or places I can just grab the images and we can explain them easier there. So Skyscraper is a pig item where Skyscraper and Space Scraper kind of do the same thing. They scale off the value of their property and they do a lot of damage based on the property. The issue here was that they had a very low cooldown, around 5 seconds and 4 seconds, and you had a lot of items that could reduce the cooldown of these items, and they had a ton of attack, a ton of shielding because they scaled really well with some of the synergy items you could pick up. So in the end game builds, this was a very consistent build that you could pretty much force with Pig every single game, and you were able to kill most opponents in 1 to 2 seconds, essentially, at the very high end. So that was really egregious. Raynan said that no one was playing properties before in their playtest, so they decided to buff it before release, and they overbuffed it completely. So they are reducing the scaling and increasing the cooldown, so it should be a little bit more fair, a little bit more time, and maybe you don't one-shot them massively. So that's a good change, helps fix the Pig end games, and maybe you have other game plans to play with Pig. Stained glass window now only doubles the value of items to the right. So stained glass window was an item that would increase the value of your properties after each win, and it would also double, triple, quadruple the value of all of your items, all of your properties. So it just massively scaled the skyscrapers. They're also toning down the stained glass window. Pretty much you only need a skyscraper and stained glass window to win with Peg, but now you might need a little bit more pieces. You have to do a little bit more work. So I do think that does help with Pig's end game and now gives you a little bit more options. Hopefully, maybe this is still very strong, but it is a step in the right direction. Dab now no longer destroys large and medium items. Instead, it only destroys all small items and then slows all enemy medium items. I personally do not like this change for Dab. I do think you can do something like this where it doesn't destroy all items, but I think you'd have to make this pretty worthwhile. You could do something like, instead of destroying the large and medium items, it now just like doubles the cooldown or something of large and medium items. Having no effect for large items for Dam just seems like you're having a massive investment to play this card, and it doesn't really have a significant payoff. So I would definitely go back to the drawing board and trying to fix this item. I do think the old Dam was problematic because it would kill all of your items, right? And then if you just survived, sometimes Dam could trigger in like 2 to 3 seconds, and then it kills all your items and you have no counterplay. So I do think this does help, but it does kind of eliminate the card. And I think that's a big issue that they're going to have to try to fix. You want to have every single card have a build or have a place in the game. And I would say right now that is not the case at all. There's a lot of cards that just don't stack up, they're too slow, or they have no synergies that make sense. So I do think you don't want to go from an item being very valuable, very played, to unplayable. You just reduce the build variety, you reduce the complexity, and it doesn't really make for an entertaining game that you can play over and over. So I do think this does solve the initial problem of Dam is too good and too fast, but you essentially killed the card, in my opinion. I don't think a lot of players will be looking to play this now, and I think that is also not a fine solution to have long term. For now, you know, whatever, but I don't necessarily like the trajectory of changing cards like that. Shipwreck now starts at Diamond tier with +1 multicast. So Shipwreck was an item that makes your aquatics +1 multicast. It started at Gold tier, and you could upgrade it to a Diamond tier for +2 multicast. So this was really, really powerful, opened up a ton of builds. Shipwreck was just very, very good at what it did. It turns a lot of your cards into crazy engines, and you could do so much powerful things with that. Moving it to Diamond tier makes it significantly harder to pick up, and now you're not going to have an early Shipwreck that really just blows up the game and makes things very easy. So decent solution. I'm not sure it's super warranted if you fix some of the other problems, but we'll see how this plays. We'll see how the games feel. I definitely want to test out this new world before I have the final thoughts, but this is my initial impressions from the changes. Robotics Factories now starts Diamond tier with +1 multicast. So this is a dually item that I heard was particularly broken. So I will say I have not played much of dually, so I don't have as much opinions on the dually crazy stuff. That's kind of Crip's territory right now, so I'm not yet. I wanted to see the changes before I really worked into dually, just so I wanted to learn the game with the other two heroes there. So I'm gonna kind of skip over it. I heard it was good, so maybe it's a good change, but I don't really know too much. Throwing Knife now requires a different item for the crit to force use trigger. So Throwing Knives was a Vanessa item that when crit would trigger, when something crit, it would trigger. It had ammo, but you had some skills to reload your ammo, and with those skills, once you had Throwing Knives able to have 100% crit, then it would trigger itself, and it would just go crazy, and it would win you the game. Just do infinite damage very quickly, win you the game. Now it requires a different item to crit to force you to trigger. I do think this helps the initial abuse cases of 100% Throwing Knives. Now you just auto crit and win. But I don't think this necessarily solves the essential problem of Throwing Knives, in that it doesn't have an eternal cooldown for its crit use trigger, because you can still do something like make Yo-Yo 100% crit, put it next to Throwing Knives. Every time Throwing Knife goes, Yo-Yo will go, Yo-Yo will crit, trigger the Throwing Knives will go, trigger the Yo-Yo, Yo-Yo will crit. You do the same thing, it just requires an extra small item. So I do think this is the basic level fix, but not the high level we are fixing the card itself level fix. So, you know, we'll see if this is enough to make the Throwing Knives build a high roll and it's not consistent, but I think you probably wanted to have an internal cooldown generically, but maybe it just means that it's a lot harder to have the chain or something like that. So Throwing Knives, it's a good change, but I still think you're going to see Throwing Knife builds be doing amazing levels of damage with even past this patch, but we'll see how consistent it is now. Blunderbuss now charges instead of uses on burn, but deals more damage. So Blunderbuss is a Vanessa item once again. It had an ability to be used and deal damage on a burn, and what you could do with Blunderbuss was have it be another alternative activator for Throwing Knives, or you could be a burn build and have it just trigger very constantly. So it was just a very easy way of having tons of damage very quickly. So now they're moving it to charge instead of burn, but now it deals more damage. So they're trying to deal with the infinite damage burst at the beginning of the game. This was one of the culprits, so that should fix that one. Charging instead of using is significantly slower, so I do think that will probably fix Blunderbuss. But we'll see how good it is now with this change. Swashbuckler, once again, we do have a ton of Vanessa items. Now, when you look at this patch, now at this point, it does feel like Vanessa was the problem. And I don't agree with that, but a lot of the changes we are aimed towards Vanessa, which is pretty interesting to see. I think Pig has a lot of like fundamental power with its kits, but we're not really addressing some of that fundamental power. We're just addressing the highest tier skyscraper space scraper issues. But I think there's a lot to do with Pig, but maybe Skyscraper and Skyscraper were overshadowing some of the other things that could be done. But Swashbuckler was an item that would give your adjacent items extra crit chance, and then it would also scale the damage if it's over 100% by the extra crit that you do have. So they decided to change some of the damage bonus now to no longer increase with tier, but to just increase the crit, I'm assuming. So that does lower the Swashbuckler. I don't necessarily remember why this was super problematic. I do know that you could have a lot of damage scaling from the crit bonus, but essentially it was probably too much, and it was a very common item to play with throwing knives to give throwing knives an insane amount of damage. Globe is a unique item where at the start of the turn, it's a common item, everyone can get it at the start of the turn or the start of the day. You're able to get 100% health at the base level. You could up it to 200 or 300 or so. But it also had an extra mechanic where when you sold it, you were able to get a new encounter. Now, that's not necessarily problematic by itself. Now, the problematic aspect was it would skip the current day you're on. So what you could do with the globe was you're about to fight a particular opponent, a particular player. Maybe you see Crip's name show up as your enemy. You can definitely use a globe you have sitting in your inventory, sell the globe, you get a different encounter, and then at the end of that encounter, you would skip the player fight and go right into the next day. So that didn't really feel intentional. Now, I do think that effect to skip a player fight if you buy some item is not a bad mechanic to have. Opens up some cool strategies, but this globe did not seem intentional to be able to do that. So they're going to be fixing that timing effect. So hopefully that is the change there. If that's not the change, doesn't really make too much sense. Vanessa's amulet is enchantment, is an item for Vanessa once again that would increase the crit chance of all of your items, or was it all of your weapons? Either all of your items, all of your weapons, but that wasn't really the problematic issue with the Vanessa amulet. The issue with the amulet is when you're enchanted this one, it would trigger the enchantment for every use of an item. Now that is extremely powerful, especially when you have things like the throwing knives triggering infinite times per second, or like 60 times per second or so. Like it just ends up being you have infinite freeze, infinite slow, infinite damage, whatever, right? So there are still items that can trigger on use, but Vanessa item was very easy and very consistently broken when you enchant it. So they're changing the enchantment into start a fight instead of on use. That's going to be a pretty big nerf for that amulet, but the amulet didn't really need to be on use trigger anyway. So I think this is fine. Start a fight is still very strong. Being able to freeze start a fight or do burn or whatever start a fight is still very useful. So still think it's going to be played, but it's not Omega out of line as it was before. Now, Mama Sora. Now, finally, this is a dually change. Dually's getting one change here. Well, that's not true, but one item change here. Mamasaurus, this was one of the best items for Dually. It could destroy items if you had 4 or I think 4 or more, right? It had to be 4 or more. Or was it 4 or less? It's either 4 or less or 4 or more. But it would essentially just destroy all of your items because you could have multicast on it and it would grow per destroy, so it would just do a ton of damage, destroy all your items. You had nothing you could really do. So just a very strong item. They're now going to make it where you can no longer destroy large items. It's still going to be very strong in my opinion, but now you have some counterplay your large items you can do something with. The dock is a common event. It would give you 2 gold most of the time and a skill. So now it no longer offers skills and reward, but gives items instead. So it's still going to be pretty good, but sometimes you were getting skills that would like completely win you the game or change like your whole idea, and it was like just like a one-off random dock. Oh, I want 2 gold, and now I gain a like crazy skill. So they're trying to lower the high roll potential of the dock. So now just give items instead. It's still pretty good to get items for free because it's essentially more gold. So still very good, the dock event, but it's now a different reward instead of skills. And then they've adjusted some dually skill core skills to be less damage core specific. That one is pretty vague. I haven't really played dually. Don't necessarily know exactly what that means, but it should be a pretty cool change. And then we have many other small fixes and adjustments. So that one you're going to have to just see in game what some of the small fixes are. Now, even though those are the highlights, some of the general fixes are also very, very important to go over. So we're going to be going over that as well. So some of the general fixes, they've adjusted a number of tooltips for clarity. I do think the tooltips right now are kind of a weak point in the Bazaar. Some of the tooltips are not very clear in what they actually do. So hopefully that will be pretty meaningful and like, oh, you read this and you understand what it does. Because sometimes you're playing the Bazaar, especially if you're a new player or anything, you're reading the tooltip, it doesn't really help you. I mean, a lot of things are done right, but sometimes the tooltip doesn't help you, especially when you're upgrading things or you're trying to figure out, oh, should I level this or that? There's no real way to know what the level up actually does, and hopefully they'll change that where the tooltips or something will give you more information so you can make more informed decisions. Fix a variety of targeting issues. Sometimes targeting is weird. That one is pretty vague, so we're going to go over it. We're going to skip it through. We fixed a variety of items that should have worked from the stash. So there are some items that work during the stash, and there's some items that work not during the stash but should. So they're hopefully they're fixing both of these. So that's a nice change. They fixed a variety of encounter options that were not counting items to the stash. That's kind of the same thing. They've fixed a variety of enchantment issues when enchantments didn't work as described. So the most notable one was the Radiant one. So that one would prevent you from being slowed, frozen, or destroyed. You would still get destroyed. And that really was very problematic when people were playing dams, and dams were completely destroying all of your items, but you still had the Radiant, it would still destroy you. So that one just seemed very problematic, very tilting if you were relying on the not being destroyed aspect to save you. Fixed a variety of hint system errors. That one is pretty vague. Fixed an item where Radiant was not functioning correctly. That is the enchantment issue, but there are more enchantment issues, but Radiant was the one that was really problematic for players. Fixed a bug where stained glass window counted as shield item, so you could get stained glass window when you're looking for shields, which didn't really make sense because didn't have a shield tag at all. So it just made that a lot easier to find, even though it shouldn't have been in that particular item slot. Fixed a bug where dam counted as a freeze item. This is the same issue where you would find dam in the freeze slot, which didn't really make sense. It made it easier to find. So good fix there. Fix the bug where item being triggered by windmill could target itself. So windmill was, I believe, a property that would charge and would make things faster. So item triggered by a windmill, you could trigger itself. Kind of an interesting issue. Probably could make some loops. Fix an item where Infernal Greatsword damage bonus from burn persisted beyond the fight. So Infernal Greatsword was loot item you could get for a PvE encounter. It would deal damage based on the burn, but the burn should not stack after the fight. But what happens is you would deal the damage, the burn would trigger, increase to the fight, and then after the fight you would keep that burn. So you could have like 2,000 attack burn perma, 8,000 attack burn perma. We have a game of that. Maybe we'll showcase it, blah, blah, blah. You fix the bug where Pedrock buffed your items from the stash. So the Pedrock was Vanessa item where if you had it as your only friend, it would buff your crit by 5%. Seems like some people were telling me that it would buff even the stash. I tried, it didn't work for me, but it seemed to work for others. So fix a bug where initial chill triggered more than once per fight. So this was a pig item where you would use a large item, it would trigger or would freeze. But what happened is it would just always work. So it was essentially very, very strong, and that you could trigger perma freeze for all of the fight. It was just a very, very strong thing to have in your build. So happy they fixed that. It was just too impactful. Fix the bug where Bazaar Khan offered a strange encounter option. So apparently that was not intentional. You could have a strange encounter, but they decided to remove that. Fix the bug where Colossus has the wrong art, not a big deal. Fix the bug where Mountain Pass risky option after day 2 was always uneventful. I would always try that, and it always just give you 1 XP. So hopefully the risky option now actually has some choices instead of just always 1 XP. Flashing mechanic was not functioning correctly. Don't know what that means. Deed combat value was not functioning correctly. So the deed is a pig item. It would double the value of all of your items in combat. It would not do anything. So it wouldn't do anything at all, and it was just a useless item currently. But hopefully now it will double your value and be functional. Fix the bug where Skyscraper was increasing its own value in combat more than intended. So the Skyscraper would be getting like 100,000 damage, right? And that probably doesn't make sense when you look at the value of your property. So seems like they would be toning that down so that you don't do 100,000 damage. Unfortunately, like even still, like 2,000 damage is still like one-shotting most things. So we'll see how impactful it is. But yeah, Skyscraper had too much value increase in the previous build. And then you have fixing a critical issue or party, like it's, you know, whatever was incorrectly written, and now it's a lot better. So the people that care about that stuff, I'm not one of those people, is significantly happier. Thanks for your patience during your process. We look forward. So it's a lot of good fixes. I don't think it fixes a lot of the egregious stuff. Well, it doesn't. It fixes a lot of the egregious stuff, but doesn't fix a lot of the 1 level down still OP things. So we'll now be seeing probably some new builds, but they'll still probably be very, very strong. But I do think that is still a good thing to do over the course. As long as you're targeting the outliers, you'll eventually get to a more balanced place. Now the issues, like, once again, the issues like the playtest didn't get through all of this beforehand, but sometimes the players in live are just better than the playtesters can be, so it's understandable. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I will be getting more dually content, is what I was thinking, but some more Bazaar content. Hope you guys have a good day and take care of yourselves. See you in